Canada just did something that affects everything between the two main trading partners in North America. And I'm watching American officials try to figure out what just happened. This is what no one is talking about. While everyone has been talking about Trump's tariffs and threatening to declare Canada the 51st state, Canada has been quietly creating something that makes Washington's power useless. It's been 7 years in the making, and we're starting to see actual effects from the trade realignment. I spent the last week looking at trade data, government papers, and predictions about the economy. What I found kept me up at night because this isn't just about the numbers. This is the end of an 80-year-old idea that formed the economy of North America. But this is when it becomes tricky. This bargain isn't new. It has been active since 2017. The way Canada is using it has changed. You can see where this is going by why they are using it now. Let me show you what's really going on. Canada's exports to Europe went up by 22% in 2025 compared to 2024. That's a big change. That means that Canadian goods are going to a whole new place. At the same time, Canadian exports to the U.S. fell by 2.4% in the first 9 months of 2025. You might believe it's merely a response to Trump's 25% tariffs that went into effect in February. You'd be partly right, but it gets worse. The data demonstrates something that no one thought would happen. Companies in Canada aren't just waiting for the tariffs to end. They are permanently overhauling all of their supply chains. Government reports say that more and more Canadian companies are doing business with European partners, while the number of enterprises having a wide range of international contacts has been going down for years. And this is what kept me awake all night. Canada is not just making trade more varied, they're undoing 20 years of growing reliance on the U.S. market. And they're doing it faster than experts thought they would. Let me explain this in more detail. For decades, Canada sent around 75% of all of its goods to the United States. That's a crazy amount of risk in one place. A single policy shift in Washington may wipe out whole Canadian sectors. That's what happened in February 2025 when Trump signed his executive orders. But no one is talking about this. The infrastructure Canada is employing to achieve this change didn't just show up out of nowhere. The Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CEDA, has been in the works since 2017. This happened in June 2025. The EU and Canada have their 20th summit. There was more than simply a handshake at that meeting. It was a digital commerce pact, a security and defense collaboration, and a promise that went beyond just buying and selling things. What I'm about to show you now changes everything. According to the Office of Canada's top economist, by September 2025, exports to markets other than the U.S. had grown by 8.3%. The U.K. witnessed the highest rise in value, although a lot of that was because of gold shipments. But the EU saw things differently. Real industrial commodities, such machinery, auto parts, and farm products. This is what that really implies. You don't move goods for a month or a quarter when you change industrial supply chains. You're changing relationships that take years to build and years to break. Canadian companies are making deals with European buyers for more than 1 year. They are becoming used to the rules in Europe. They're developing logistics networks that don't go through American ports at all. This is when the stats start to become intriguing. With overall commerce between Canada and the EU reaching $75.6 billion, Canada's trade balance with the EU was $20 billion in 2024. In contrast, Europeans buy $360 billion worth of American goods every year in the US-EU economic partnership. I want to be clear that $360 billion isn't going away. However, Canada is becoming more important in European markets, which means they are vying for the same contracts, logistics capacity, and regulatory priority. And this is what American trade officials are worried about. Every percentage point of Canadian market share that goes to Europe means American suppliers won't gain that market share in cars, agriculture, or industrial machinery. These are not one-time deals. They are long-term connections. Does this impact how you think about what's going on between Canada and the U.S.? Because things become even more difficult after this. Let's go back to February 1st, 2025. Trump executes 3 executive orders that put 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods and 10% on Canadian energy. The official reasons were fentanyl and border security, but everyone knew what this was actually about. Trump has said that Canada was a subsidy for the U.S. He had been talking about Canada becoming the 51st state long before he took president. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, tried to stop it, but it was too late. And then in March, things changed. Mark Carney was named Prime Minister of Canada. And if you know anything about Carney, you know this wasn't just another politician getting sworn in. This was the previous governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He knows more about global finance than most politicians ever can. And Carney walked in with a statement that shocked everyone. He declared in his victory address that the 80 years when the U.S. was the world's economic leader were finished. The old relationship of getting closer and closer to the United States was over. He didn't hold back. He didn't make it easier. He said what he thought. But this is when it becomes tricky. Carney didn't just say he was free and leave. He had a plan, and that plan had been in the works for years before he even became president. CDA went into provisional application in 2017. Overnight, 98% of tariffs between Canada and the EU went away. Most people didn't notice because trade flows don't shift that quickly. One trade deal doesn't make businesses change their supply chains. They need things to be predictable. They ought to be in line with the rules. They require logistics support. And then this took place. For 7 years, authorities from Canada and Europe secretly worked on making rules the same. They made technological standards the same. They worked together to make sure certification processes ran smoothly. They created the boring infrastructure that makes trading possible. By 2024, trade between Canada and the EU has grown by 65% since CETA was signed. Services and trade went up by 73%. These data don't show a bounce back from the pandemic. These are changes in structure that happen every year. What I'm about to show you will help you understand why American officials are worried. Carney went to Brussels in June 2025 for the 20th EU-Canada meeting I talked about previously. What he said there was more than just trading. Canada and the EU started working together on security and defense. They said they were going to talk about a digital trade deal. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, stood next to Carney and said something that should have made the news. With your resources, Canada is in a unique position, and the European Union is happy to be your second largest consumer. Hold on, it gets worse, von der Leyen went on. We want to strengthen our strategic partnership with Canada so that we can work together more closely. This wasn't just polite talk. This was Europe openly trying to get a G7 ally to stop being so close to the U.S. And here's the thing that no one is talking about. Canada spends nearly 3/4 of every defense dollar it has with the U.S. right now. Carney said in public that this is not a good idea. He is now working with defense contractors in Europe. He is talking about buying things together. He is changing the way the military and industry have worked together for decades. This is what it looks like in real life. Trade data from late 2025 shows that Canada sent a lot more goods to Germany. Exports to the Netherlands shot up. These are more than simply raw elements. We're talking about machines, car parts, electronic goods, and other things that American companies also sell in Europe. But that's not the whole tale. What's really going on with American leverage is the true story. For years, when Washington demanded anything from Ottawa, there was an unspoken threat. We're the customer that buys the most from you. Don't forget it. That threat worked because Canada didn't have many other options. This is what that really means now. Carney didn't flinch when Trump threatened to raise tariffs by another 10% in October because of an anti-tariff ad in Ontario. Trump never did what he said he would do. When Trump threatened to put 100% tariffs on Canada because of its deal with China last week, Canadian officials didn't say anything in public. They don't fear anymore. And that should scare American trade negotiators because this is the calculation that keeps Washington awake at night. The United States does business with Canada more than any other country. Trade between the two countries is worth more than $1 trillion a year. Canadian resources, including oil, natural gas, minerals, and farm goods, go south. Things made in the U.S. go north. That's how it's been for a long time. But what happens when Canada has real options? What happens when European buyers can promise more predictability than American purchasers can? This is what kept me awake all night. Canada's own prediction says that by 2035, they want to increase its exports to markets outside of the US. That's not a way to protect yourself. That's an aggressive plan to completely change their economy, and they aren't doing it by themselves. The budget for 2025 set up $5 billion over 7 years for a trade diversification corridors fund. They're putting money into ports, railroads, computerized customs systems, and everything else that has to be done to move products east and west instead of just south. Does this impact how you think about the relationship between these two countries? Because what happens next is much more telling. Let me show you something that will help you understand why this is more important than most people think. Tiff Mulham, the governor of the Bank of Canada, gave a speech in September 2025 that shifted the conversation. MLM argued that Canadian officials should have made these modifications to the structure 15 years ago. He was talking about the 2008 financial crisis when everyone talked about diversifying, but nothing happened. When the recession ended and U.S. demand came back, Canadian businesses lost their sense of urgency. But this is when things get tricky. MLM made it plain that this time is different. He claimed that Canada and the U.S. are not going through a slowdown that happens every so often. Unless business leaders and officials change some areas of the economy, there won't be a bounce back. And this kept happening all until 2025. The data started to show the evidence. Canadian manufacturers said that they were revamping their supply chains at speeds that haven't been seen since NAFTA went into effect. Surveys show that by June 2025, 2/5 of Canadian manufacturers said U.S. tariffs had hurt them. What I'm about to show you now will show you how big this really is. In the second quarter of 2025, Canadian exports to nations other than the United States rose by 24.8% from one month to the next. That is the second biggest rise in history that we know of. At the same time, exports to the U.S. fell by 6.6%, the biggest reduction since the pandemic. Hold on, things are getting worse for American suppliers. RSM Economics says that Canada has only made up for 25% to 30% of the lost U.S. export volume by finding new customers. This suggests that there is a lot of potential for more redirection. Right now, the infrastructure is being created to make that part bigger. Let me put this in perspective. It's hard to get back market share in industrial supply chains after you've lost it. A Canadian aluminum maker that signs a 5-year deal with a German car maker isn't going to break that deal when American tariffs go down. The relationship is set up. Standards for quality are met. Logistics are at their best. And this is what makes American businesses nervous. These contracts don't just have an effect on one business or industry. They flow through whole supply systems. A Canadian company that makes car parts for BMW in Germany isn't getting American steel for those parts. They are buying from European providers that meet EU criteria. This is where the numbers start to get really fascinating. Oxford Economics believes that by May 2025, Canada had effectively stopped giving U.S. exporters exclusive access to some markets, not through formal tariffs, but by changing the way the market works. But no one is talking about this. The U.S. still owes Canada more money than it gets from trade. That deficit was $45 billion in 2024. That is the second smallest trade deficit in the U.S., making up only 4% of the total U.S. trade deficit. So the statistics doesn't back up what American authorities say about unfair trade with Canada. What they actually care about is losing power, and the proof reveals that leverage is going down. Let me show you how this appears in some areas. The United States still gets most of its crude oil from Canada, with 97% of Canadian oil exports going south. However, the Trans Mountain Pipeline extension finished in 2024 made it possible to carry more oil from the Pacific coast. The West Ridge Marine Terminal was loading up to 450,000 barrels a day for Asian markets by April 2025. That oil used to only have one customer, the United States. It has choices now. In 2024, Canadian canola growers had to deal with 100% Chinese tariffs that made their crops very expensive. The deal Carney just struck with China cuts those to 15% by March 2026. Canadian canola growers now have access to Asian markets again, which makes it harder for American soybean farmers to compete there. This is what that really implies. When Canada diversifies, it puts pressure on American manufacturers in every area. This doesn't happen directly, but through changes in global market dynamics that affect price power and contract leverage. And then this happened in January of 2026. Trump said he would put 100% tariffs on Canada if Carney went through with the deal with China. Carney went forward anyhow. Trump backed down from putting the tariffs into place. That tells you everything you need to know about who has the upper hand right now. What I'm about to show you changes everything. The EU isn't only buying more things from Canada, they're including Canada in their long-term plans. The Security and Defense Partnership, which was launched in June 2025, includes plans for collaborative military procurement, making ammunition, and working together in the defense industry. Carney noted that Canada spends 3/4 of its defense budget on the US. This is the part that kept me up last night. And that's not a good idea. He wasn't just making a casual comment. He was hinting at a geopolitical shift that goes far beyond trade. This is the math that counts. NATO nations are working toward a goal of spending 5% of their GDP on defense. That's tens of billions of dollars a year in purchases for Canada. If even a small part of it goes to European vendors, American defense contractors will lose not only money, but also power over Canadian strategic planning. Does this impact how you feel about what's at stake? This either a temporary change or a permanent realignment, depending on what occurs next. Let me show you where this really goes from here, because what we're seeing isn't a trade disagreement that can be settled through discussion. This is a big change in how North American economies work together. This is what American leaders are dealing with right now. Canada has shown that it can change the flow of commerce. It has trade arrangements with Europe that are still in effect. Deals with Indonesia and Ecuador that are still being worked out, restored access to Chinese markets, and investments in infrastructure to help it diversify even more. The idea that Canada would always come back to the American market no matter what, that idea is no longer true. But this is when things get tricky. Canada still cares a lot about the United States. 3/4 of exports still go south. The geography hasn't altered. Integrated supply chains in the automotive, aerospace, and energy industries won't go away suddenly. The balance of power has changed. Canada now has choices when it comes to discussions. When Trump threatens tariffs, Canadian officials can refer to other markets and say, "Are you sure you want to push us away?" Then this occurred. Carney's remarks at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January 2026 delivered a message to Washington. He warned that superpowers could use their economies to force people to do things. He said, middle powers must work together because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. He didn't say the United States by name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly what he meant. Hold on, things are going to get worse for the conventional USC relationship. Carney said that there was a break between the US under Trump and its Western friends that would never be entirely healed. A Canadian prime minister doesn't say things like that about the country's closest partner. Now, what I'm going to teach you will help you understand why this moment is more important than most people think. Canada's economic strategy for the past 80 years has been dependent on the US being the leader in global commerce. That's it. Canada has determined that it can't count on American leadership anymore, no matter who is in charge. Let me put this in perspective. Canada's budget for 2025 set aside $639 million over 5 years for industries hurt by U.S. trade policies. But they didn't only use their money to bail people out, put money into programs that help change things, diversify agriculture, build better ports, and make railroads that convey commodities east-west instead of north-south. This is the portion that should worry American strategists. Canada isn't waiting for things to change in Washington. They're making permanent options. And this is what no one is talking about. This is being watched by other countries. What does it mean for Mexico, European friends, and Asian trading partners if Canada, America's closest ally, has the longest undefended border and the most integrated economy, can effectively break free from U.S. dependence? This is what that really implies. The U.S.'s economic power, which has been a key part of its foreign policy since World War II, is being put to the test right now. And Canada is showing that it's not as certain as everyone thought. But let me be clear about what this isn't. This isn't Canada saying no to the US. This isn't a policy that goes against America. Canadian authorities keep saying that they care about the relationship between the two countries and want it to work. Canada is saying that it won't be taken for granted. It's Canada saying, we'll trade with you, work with you, and agree with you on many things, but only on our terms, not because we have to. This is important for the next generation of Canadians. Young people who start working will do so in an economy that is less likely to be affected by rapid changes in Washington. Industries can make plans with more certainty. Not every strategic move is based on the fact that the U.S. is always unsure of what it will do next. This makes things different for Americans, especially those who work in industry, agricultural, and resource industries near the Canadian border. European buyers are increasingly offering Canadian suppliers long-term contracts that they can count on. It's not easy to get those relationships back. This is where I need you to really think about this. Is Canada undertaking a bold strategic decision that will compel partners to work together better? Or are they taking a big risk that could backfire if European markets don't deliver on their promises? The data will tell us in a few years, but for now, the trend is evident. In the first 9 months of 2025, Canada sent 8.3% more goods to markets outside the US. They want to double that by 2035. They have all the right pieces in place: infrastructural expenditures, trade agreements, and political will. The idea that Canada had no choice but to do business with the US for 80 years is no longer true. Next comes a North American connection based on choice instead of need, and that changes everything. I'd like to know what you think of this. Is Canada's plan smart given Trump's tariffs, or are they taking too big of a risk by moving away from their biggest trading partner? Please leave a remark and let me know. In the